My mansion, gone. Reduced to a pile of garbage on the mountain my family has owned for generations. This power-hungry HOA demolished my home after slapping me with a $25,000 fine for hunting on my own land. Land I'm not even in their HOA for. The president, a smug real estate agent playing queen, thought she could bully me into submission. She watched with a smile as the bulldozers rolled in, thinking she had finally won. But what she didn't know is that she wasn't just destroying my home, she was about to lose her own. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because this revenge story is about to get brutal. And if you believe no HOA tyrant should ever get away with this kind of abuse, hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment they get exactly what they deserve. The air still tasted of diesel fuel and freshly turned earth. From the edge of my property, where the old-growth pines began, I watched the last excavator crawl its way down the makeshift road, its yellow arm tucked in like a sleeping beast. Where my home used to stand, there was nothing. Just a slab of concrete, fractured and raw, surrounded by a sea of splintered wood and broken glass. They hadn't just knocked it down, they'd pulverized it. My mansion, the one I designed and built with my own hands, after a lifetime of putting cities back together in places most people only see on the news, was gone, flattened. A cold, hard knot tightened in my gut. It wasn't sadness. It was the calm before a storm, the kind of quiet that settles over a battlefield when one side makes a fatal mistake. They thought this was the end. They had no idea it was just the beginning. 2 months earlier, that same spot was the most peaceful place on earth. My land, 160 acres of mountain paradise, was deeded and paid for long before the first foundation was poured in the fancy subdivision below. I wasn't part of their world. I was off-grid, on my own well, my own power. I bought this place to be left alone, a quiet bookend to a loud career as a combat engineer. My grandson Mark was up for his spring break. At 13, he was all angles and energy, but in the woods, he was focused. He had his grandfather's patience. We'd spent the morning tracking a good-sized buck through the aspens. It was a clean shot, a good hunt. Back at the house, we worked together, skinning and dressing the deer in my outbuilding. It was a skill I'd learned from my own father, and passing it down to Mark felt right, felt important. It was about respect for the animal and providing for your own. We hung the meat in the big walk-in cooler I'd built into the shed, a process I'd repeated every fall and winter for 15 years. It was our tradition. It was my right. Life was simple, and it was good. 2 days later, the first shot in the war was fired. I found it when I went down to get the mail. Nailed to the heavy wooden gate at the end of my long gravel driveway was a crisp white envelope. Not tucked in the bars or left on a post. Nailed. A single heavy-gauge nail driven right through the center. Inside was a letter. Thick and official feeling, with a professionally printed letterhead. The Ridges at Eagle Peak Homeowners Association. I'd seen their signs down on the main road, but they had nothing to do with me. My parcel was carved out of the mountain a good 50 years before their developer ever broke ground. I read the first line and snorted. "Dear property occupant," it began. It went on to inform me that I was in violation of Covenant 14(7)(b), which prohibited the unauthorized field dressing and processing of game animals on HOA-regulated land. The letter was signed by someone named Lynette Hardgrove, the newly appointed HOA president. Then I saw the number at the bottom of the page, printed in a bold, accusatory font. A fine of $25,000 has been assessed to your property. Payment is due within 30 days to avoid further action. I read it again. $25,000. For what? For hunting on my own land, cleaning a deer in my own shed, miles from their perfectly manicured lawns. It was insane. It was extortion. The sheer audacity of it was almost comical. These were people who thought their jurisdiction extended wherever their eyes could see. I'd dealt with petty warlords and corrupt officials in third world countries who had more respect for property lines than this. They were running a little kingdom down there in the valley, and they'd decided to expand their borders with a piece of paper and a nail. I walked back up the driveway, the letter crinkling in my fist. That night, I started a fire in the stone pit out on my patio. Mark was inside, reading a book, the warm light from the house spilling out onto the flagstones. The mountain air was cold and clean. I stared at the letter one last time, at the arrogant signature and the ridiculous sum. Then I folded it neatly, dropped it into the flames, and watched it turn to ash. It was a mistake, of course. Not because they had any right on their side, but because I underestimated the venom of a powerless person who'd been given a little bit of authority. I treated it like a joke. To Lynette Hardgrove, it was anything but. I had just ignored a royal decree, and the Queen was not going to be pleased. A week went by, and I heard nothing. I figured my fiery response had sent the intended message. I was wrong. I was in my workshop, recalibrating the blade on my table saw, when a flicker of movement down the driveway caught my eye. A gleaming black SUV, the kind that looks out of place on a gravel road, was crawling its way toward my house. It parked 100 feet from the workshop, and a woman got out of the passenger side. She was in her 50s, dressed in a sharp blazer and slacks that were far too nice for the mountain dust. She carried a clipboard like it was a scepter. It had to be Lynette Hardgrove. 2 men got out of the back. They weren't big, but they had that self-important posture of guys who think a tactical vest from an army surplus store makes them law enforcement. One of them, a man in his 40s with a buzz cut and a sour face, launched a small drone into the air. It buzzed over my head like a giant, angry mosquito. "Can I help you?" I called out, wiping my hands on a rag. I didn't walk toward them. I made them come to me, right to the threshold of my shop. The woman stopped 10 feet away, her companions flanking her. Her smile was brittle, a perfect row of white teeth that didn't match the coldness in her eyes. "Jack Dalton? I'm Lynette Hardgrove, president of the Eagle Peak HOA. We sent you a notice last week." "I got it," I said. "And you're on private property. My property, not yours." "That's a matter of interpretation," she said, tapping her clipboard. "According to our revised charters, your parcel is now subject to covenant retro-adoption due to its proximity to a planned residential expansion zone." She said the words slowly, as if reading from a script designed to confuse and intimidate. It was pure gibberish, a word salad of legal-sounding nonsense. I'd seen it before overseas. Use big words to make people feel small so they give up without a fight. I just stared at her. "There's no such thing. You're trespassing. I'd like you, your friends, and your toy to leave now." Her smile tightened. "I assure you, the fine is very real, and we have documented your violation." She gestured up at the buzzing drone. "You have 21 days left to pay." She turned on her heel and marched back to the SUV, her 2 goons falling in behind her. As they drove away, a cloud of dust settled over my quiet piece of the world. That night, I made sure the game cameras covering the shed and the approach to my house had fresh batteries. The alert on my phone woke me up around 3 in the morning. Motion detected near the outbuilding. I pulled up the live feed on my tablet. 2 figures, shrouded in darkness but clear as day in the infrared view. It was them. The 2 goons from the afternoon. I watched, my blood running cold and slow, as one of them produced a pair of bolt cutters and snapped the heavy-duty padlock on my cooler door. The other one went inside and started hauling out the butchered, wrapped portions of deer meat, tossing them onto the dirt floor of the shed. They didn't steal it, they just dumped it out to spoil. It was a message. It was personal. I saved the footage and called the sheriff's department at dawn. A deputy finally rolled up around noon. He was young, looked bored, and took a few notes. I showed him the high-resolution video. You could see their faces perfectly. "That's Mark Brenner," he said, pointing at the sour-faced one. "He's their so-called security director. Fancies himself a cop." I expected him to say he'd go have a talk with them, maybe file a report for trespassing and destruction of property. Instead, he just sighed and closed his notebook. "Look, Mr. Dalton, they'll just say you were violating environmental safety rules by storing raw game improperly. The HOA will claim they had a right to abate the nuisance. It's a civil matter. You'll have to take it up with them or get a lawyer." And that was it. He got in his car and left. They had trespassed, destroyed my property on camera, and the law just shrugged. The real blow came 2 days later. I went out to my workshop to finish the project I'd started, and there it was, plastered right across the door. A bright orange stop work order from the county. The text was stark. "All activities at this location are to cease immediately pending an investigation into unauthorized commercial activity within a residential zoned region." It was signed by a county code enforcement officer. Attached was a copy of the complaint, filed by one Lynette Hardgrove. She was claiming my workshop, the one I used for my own projects and to store the tools of my trade from my contracting days, was an illegal commercial operation. That evening, with my daughter Sam on the phone worrying in my ear, I pulled out every piece of paper I had on my land, the original title from my grandfather, the county plat maps, the survey records, my deed. I spent hours poring over them, cross-referencing every line, every boundary marker, every zoning ordinance. It was just as I thought. My land was zoned for rural use, predating the HOA's entire existence. I was in the clear. Legally, she didn't have a leg to stand on. But facts don't matter to people like her. She wasn't using the law. She was using the system. A quick search online confirmed my suspicion. Lynette Hardgrove wasn't just some power-tripping real estate agent. She also had a seat on the Municipal Development Board. She had connections inside the very county office that had issued the order. That's when I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a fine over a deer. It was an attack. My peaceful life was under siege, and this woman was using her petty throne to coordinate a full-scale assault. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. The letters started coming daily. Each one arrived in a crisp, business-sized envelope. Left in my mailbox this time. No more nails. Inside, it was the same story, different day. A bill for non-compliance with the stop work order. The charge was $1,000 per day. The numbers on the page grew with a sickening rhythm. 1,000, 2,000. By the end of the week, I was supposedly on the hook for $7,000, on top of the original ridiculous fine. They were trying to bury me in paper, hoping I'd panic and write a check to make it all go away. Then came the letter that was meant to be the knockout blow. It was sent via certified mail, so I had to sign for it down at the post office. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of, acting on behalf of the Eagle Peak HOA. The language was dense with legal threats, but the message was simple. If the accumulated fines weren't paid in full within 15 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. They were coming for my land. My daughter Sam called that night. She was beside herself. "Dad, this is getting out of hand. You could lose everything. The house, the land, everything you've built. Just hire a lawyer, please. Or maybe just pay them? I know it's not right, but what if they can actually do this?" Her voice was tight with fear, the same fear they were counting on. She was a teacher, a single mom. Her world was orderly, and this attack felt like pure chaos to her. She wanted it to stop. "Sam, honey, you can't negotiate with a bully," I told her, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. "You don't pay them to go away. That just teaches them that bullying works. I'm handling it." But I could hear the doubt in her silence. She thought my pride was going to ruin us. The next day, my old friend Mike called. We'd served together, built bridges under fire in places where a mistake could get your whole unit wiped out. He was a man of direct action. "Jack, I heard what's going on," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Me and a couple of the boys, we could take a drive up there. have a chat with this Lynette Hardgrove. No fuss, no mess. Just a conversation to help her understand property rights. I knew what he meant. He was offering a physical solution to a paper problem. A few years ago, maybe I would have considered it. But I'd spent too many years of my life watching strong-arm tactics lead to nothing but bigger fights. Vengeance feels good for a minute, but justice, real justice, has to be built on a foundation that can't be washed away. I appreciate it, Mike. More than you know, I said. But I need to do this my way, by the book. He grunted. Your funeral, Jack. Just remember the offer stands. I hung up the phone and walked out onto my deck, looking out over the mountains. He was wrong. It wasn't about the book they wrote. It was about the book they hadn't read. I thought back to a job we had in a dusty little province overseas. We were trying to build a new water treatment facility for a village that desperately needed it. A local warlord, a man with a private militia and a seat on the provincial council, wanted a cut. A big one. He was holding up our supply convoys, inventing permit violations, using armed men to block the access road. He had all the power, all the guns. The brass wanted to send in a team to negotiate. But I went to the provincial archives. I spent 3 days digging through dusty, forgotten British colonial survey maps from the 1890s. And there it was. A deeded public right-of-way. A cart path that ran right through the back of his compound, which had never been legally extinguished. It was still on the books. We didn't send in soldiers. We sent in a single bulldozer with a police escort and a notarized copy of that 100-year-old map. We carved a new road right through his back gate. He couldn't do a thing about it. We built the facility, and he lost all his credibility. You don't beat corruption with a punch. You beat it by owning the infrastructure. You beat it with the paperwork. They were too arrogant to read themselves. A few days later, the final escalation arrived. Another certified letter. This one wasn't a threat. It was an order. A demolition order for my workshop, citing it as an unsafe structure operating in violation of county zoning. It had an official county seal, and it was stamped and signed by a man named Judge Elbert Crane. I did a quick search. Crane lived 2 streets over from Lynette Hardgrove in the Eagle Peak subdivision. He was one of them. My calls to the county planning department went nowhere. I was transferred to voicemails, put on indefinite hold, told that the issuing office was in a meeting. The system was sealed tight. They were moving to erase me from the mountain, piece by piece. The next afternoon, the drone came back. It hovered 100 yards away, a mechanical spy in the sky, watching me. I was cleaning my hunting rifle on the porch, getting it ready for storage, now that my grandson was gone. The buzzing was a constant, infuriating reminder of their invasion. For a moment, a hot, dark impulse shot through me. I raised the rifle, the scope finding the drone in its crosshairs. My finger rested on the trigger. It would be so easy. A single satisfying crack, and their eye in the sky would fall out of it. But I saw the flash forward. The sheriff. The charges. Me playing their game on their terms. It's what they wanted. I took a deep breath, lowered the rifle, and broke it down, placing the pieces carefully into its case. Then I turned my back on the drone and walked inside. The fight wasn't out there. It was in the archives, in the deeds, in the very fine print of the rules they thought only they could write. And I was about to read every single word. The next morning, I didn't waste time calling officials who wouldn't answer. Instead, I drove down to the county records office. It was a sterile, quiet place that smelled like old paper and disinfectant. I spent the next 3 days there, from the minute they opened to the minute they closed. I was on a mission, digging through archives, unrolling brittle plat maps, and squinting at microfilm until my eyes burned. I pulled the original subdivision charters for Eagle Peak. I read every word of the HOA's bylaws, including all the amendments dating back 20 years. I traced the property lines of every parcel bordering my land. I was building a map, not of the land, but of their power structure. And just like any structure, I was looking for the weak points in the foundation. I found the first crack on day 2. Tucked away in the meeting minutes from 3 years ago was a resolution passed by the HOA board. It claimed to absorb several unincorporated parcels, mine included, into their jurisdiction, citing a vague clause about community harmony and aesthetic consistency. It was a complete fabrication, legally unenforceable. They had simply voted themselves into power over land they had no claim to. They were banking on no one ever checking the source documents. The more I dug, the dirtier it got. I cross-referenced the names on the HOA board: Lynette, her sour-faced security guy Mark Brenner, and 2 others, with business filings and property records. A pattern emerged. Lynette and her cronies were systematically targeting properties that bordered undeveloped land, hitting the owners with bogus fines and legal threats. Their goal wasn't just to enforce rules, it was to drive people out. They were trying to acquire land by force, using fines and liens to bully owners into selling cheap. And I found who they were selling to: a commercial developer, a luxury resort company that was in the early stages of planning a series of high-end rental cabins. Lynette was using her HOA presidency and her seat on the development board to clear a path for them, inflating the value of the land with every small victory. My land, with its pristine view and direct mountain access, was the crown jewel they needed for their project to succeed. That's why they were hitting me so hard. I wasn't just a nuisance. I was an obstacle to a multi-million-dollar deal. The knowledge was validating, but it also made me feel isolated. This was a coordinated effort, and I was on my own, or so I thought. On the 3rd day at the records office, a man sat down at the table across from me. He was in his late 60s, with a weathered face and hands like worn leather gloves. He looked tired. He had a stack of threatening letters from the Eagle Peak HOA sitting in front of him. After an hour of watching me pull map after map, he finally spoke. "Finding anything good in that pile?" he asked, his voice a low grumble. I looked up. "Maybe," I said. "Depends what you're looking for." His name was Cal Riggins. He was a retired trucker who'd lived in a small house on the edge of the subdivision for 30 years. He told me the HOA was trying to fine him into oblivion for parking his old, lovingly restored Peterbilt truck on a gravel pad beside his house, something he'd been doing for 2 decades without a single complaint. Lynette called it an unauthorized commercial vehicle in a residential viewshed. The fines were now over $10,000, and they were threatening to foreclose. As we talked, another person joined us, a quiet widow named Mary, whose husband had passed away a year prior. The HOA was harassing her for the color of her trim, claiming it wasn't on the approved palette, a palette they'd conveniently changed a month after her husband died. She couldn't afford a painter, and the daily fines were terrifying her. We weren't alone. We were a collection of loose threads they were trying to snip, one by one. Sitting there, in that musty office, a different kind of feeling started to take root. It wasn't just my fight anymore. We were 3 strangers, united by a common enemy. The quiet solidarity in that room felt more powerful than any legal threat. Together, we found the rest of the puzzle pieces. Cal knew people. Mary knew history. We pooled our knowledge and uncovered the deeper connection. Lynette, 3 of her board members, and Judge Elbert Crane were all named as minority partners in a local investor group, the same group working with the luxury cabin developer. It was a closed loop of corruption. They used the HOA to harass residents, the development board to approve zoning changes, and a corrupt judge to rubber stamp the orders. They were leveraging their official positions for personal profit, hiding in plain sight. They felt untouchable. My daughter Sam, now fully invested, helped me dig online. She found forum posts, complaints on social media from a dozen other families who'd been bullied by Lynette's HOA, but were too scared to fight back. The tide was turning. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about an entire community being held hostage. That night, after saying goodbye to Cal and Mary, I drove home feeling a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The anger was gone, replaced by a cold, hard focus. I knew how to fight them now. It wasn't going to be with a rifle or a shouting match. It was going to be with their own weapons: paperwork, bylaws, and ownership. I sat at my desk and pulled up a real estate listing site, my fingers flying across the keyboard. My plan was risky. It would take every penny I had saved. But if it worked, it would not just stop them. It would dismantle their entire kingdom. I picked up the phone and made a call to an attorney I trusted, a sharp, no-nonsense guy who specialized in corporate law. "It's Jack Dalton," I said when he answered. "I need you to set up an LLC for me, quietly. And then I need you to get ready to file an offer." There was a pause on the other end. "An offer for what?" he asked. I smiled. "For their entire neighborhood." The monthly HOA board meeting was held in the clubhouse of the Eagle Peak subdivision, a building with vaulted ceilings and oversized leather furniture designed to project an image of wealth and authority. I walked in wearing the same clothes I'd worn to the records office: work boots, worn jeans, and a faded flannel shirt. The room was half full of residents, most of them looking anxious or resigned. At the front, Lynette Hardgrove sat at the center of a long table, flanked by her board. She wore a pristine white pantsuit and a look of supreme confidence. Her eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on me, a small, triumphant smirk played on her lips. She probably thought I was there to beg, to plead my case in front of the neighbors she'd already cowed into submission. Cal and Mary were there, sitting near the back, and gave me a subtle nod as I took a seat. The meeting droned on with the usual HOA business: disputes over lawn maintenance, complaints about garbage cans left out too long. Lynette handled each item with a condescending tone, making it clear she was in charge and her decisions were final. The residents who spoke up were quickly shut down with confusing references to bylaws and covenants. It was a masterclass in petty tyranny. Finally, she moved to the last item on the agenda. "And now," she said, her voice dripping with false solemnity, "we must address the ongoing non-compliance issue with the unpermitted structure on the Dalton parcel." She looked directly at me. "Mr. Dalton, despite numerous notices and a legally filed demolition order, you have failed to rectify the situation. The board has voted to proceed with the removal of the structure at your expense. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping lightly on the polished floor. The room went silent. All eyes were on me. I didn't look at her. I addressed the residents. "My name is Jack Dalton," I began, my voice calm and even. "For the past few weeks, this board has been harassing me, fining me, and trying to seize my property under false pretenses. They've done the same to some of you." I saw a few heads nod in the crowd. Lynette started to interrupt, but I kept going. "They've been doing this because they have a hidden financial stake in a development deal that requires them to take control of our land. They've abused their power, and tonight, that abuse ends." Lynette slammed her gavel on the table. "This is outrageous. You are out of order. This is not a public forum for your conspiracy theories." "Actually," I said, finally turning to look at her, "it is. Because as of 3 p.m. this afternoon, my newly formed LLC, the Mountain Freedom Trust, had completed the purchase of 72 undeveloped parcels within the Eagle Peak subdivision." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, folded document, placing it on the table in front of her. "I am now the majority landowner in this neighborhood." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lynette's face went from smug to stunned in a heartbeat. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. The secret to my plan was simple, something I'd learned digging through the archives. After the housing market crashed back in 2008, the original developer of Eagle Peak went bankrupt. To recoup their losses, the bank sold off all the undeveloped lots in a bulk auction for pennies on the dollar. They were bought by an out-of-state investment company that had sat on them ever since, paying the minimal property taxes and waiting for the market to turn. No one in the HOA, not even Lynette, had ever bothered to check who actually owned the empty land around them. My lawyer found the investment firm. They were eager to sell. I liquidated my retirement accounts, every stock, every bond I owned. It was a massive gamble, but it was the only move I had. What is this?" Lynette stammered, staring at the document as if it were a snake. "That," I said, my voice dropping a little lower, "is a copy of the HOA charter. The one you claim gives you all your power. I'm sure you're familiar with Article 12, Section 4. It states that any special vote, including a vote to dissolve the charter, can be called by members holding a majority of parcel voting rights." I let that hang in the air for a moment. As the owner of 72 parcels, I now hold those rights. And I am officially calling for a special vote to dissolve the Eagle Peak Homeowners Association, effective immediately. The room erupted. People were on their feet, talking, shouting. Cal was grinning from ear to ear. Lynette's face had turned a blotchy, furious red. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, finding her voice. "This is illegal. I will not acknowledge this." "You don't have to," I said calmly. "The vote isn't up to you. It's up to the property owners." I then pulled a second, thinner document from my pocket and handed it to her. "And this is a cease and desist letter from my attorney. It demands an immediate halt to all enforcement activities, fines, and legal actions directed at me, Mr. Riggins, Mrs. Gable, and several other residents. Any further contact will be considered harassment and will be met with a federal lawsuit." Her hand trembled as she took the paper. She stared at it, her illusion of control shattering right in front of the entire neighborhood. She looked cornered, defeated. For a moment, I thought it was over. But I had underestimated the desperation of a tyrant about to be dethroned. She wouldn't give up her kingdom without burning it to the ground. Lynette didn't fold. She doubled down. Humiliated in front of the residents she had ruled over, she pulled her last remaining lever of power. She went straight to Judge Elbert Crane. It was a desperate, last-ditch move. My attorney later pieced it together for me. She filed an emergency appeal in his court, claiming my illegal commercial structure, the workshop, posed an imminent environmental and safety hazard to the community. It was a complete lie, but Crane rubber-stamped it without a second thought. He issued a retroactive demolition order, backdating it to before the public meeting, making it look like it was already in motion. They were creating a paper trail to justify what they were about to do, moving faster than the law could ever hope to keep up. I spent the next 2 days in town at my attorney's office, finalizing the legal filings to dissolve the HOA and preparing the groundwork for the federal lawsuit. My phone was off, my focus absolute. We were building an ironclad case. It was mid-afternoon when I finally switched my phone back on. It exploded with notifications, a dozen missed calls from my daughter, a frantic voicemail from Cal, and a string of motion alerts from my home security system. The most recent one was from an hour ago. My stomach clenched. I pulled up the live feed from the camera overlooking my driveway. The screen filled with a scene of absolute chaos. 2 massive yellow bulldozers were tearing into the side of my house. Not the workshop, the house. My home. Men with chainsaws were felling the ancient pine trees that lined the drive. And standing off to the side, watching it all with a grim sense of satisfaction, were 2 county sheriff's deputies, their presence giving the destruction a sickening veneer of legality. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. I was watching my life being torn apart in real time on a 4-inch screen. I dropped the phone and ran out of the office, shouting to my lawyer that they were destroying my house. We broke every speed limit getting back up the mountain, but by the time we arrived, it was already over. The bulldozers were gone. The deputies were gone. The work crews were gone. All that remained was a ruin. The mansion I'd built, The place my grandson had taken his first steps, the home I'd planned to live in for the rest of my days, was a heap of rubble. My daughter Sam was already there, standing at the edge of the devastation, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. My grandson Mark stood beside her, his young face a mask of confusion and grief. He just kept looking from the wreckage to me, as if waiting for me to fix it, to put it all back together like I always did. But some things, once broken, can't be put back. A profound, terrifying quiet settled over me. The rage, the panic, the despair, it was all there churning deep inside. But on the surface, I was perfectly still. I felt a strange and awful calm. It was the same feeling I'd had on the battlefield when a plan goes catastrophically wrong, when you lose people you were sworn to protect. It's a moment of pure, cold clarity. You don't scream. You don't cry. You focus. You calculate. You finish the mission. They hadn't just crossed a line, they'd torched the entire map. This was no longer about fines or bylaws or even land. They had brought the war to my family. They had made my daughter cry. They had broken my grandson's heart. And in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. The next morning, I walked into the county courthouse. I was clean-shaven, wearing my best suit. I filed the federal lawsuit my attorney and I had prepared, naming Lynette Hardgrove, the HOA board, Judge Elbert Crane, and the county itself as defendants. The charges included conspiracy, abuse of power, illegal demolition, and a dozen other violations. But that was just the opening salvo. While the county's legal department was still reeling from that hit, I made my real move. I went to the online community forum for the Eagle Peak subdivision, a place Lynette had once used to post her tyrannical edicts. I posted a single message. It was a copy of a newly filed legal document. I had flipped my LLC, the Mountain Freedom Trust that held the deeds to all those empty lots, into a resident-controlled land trust. I had signed over the ownership and all the voting power that came with it to a new board. And the first 3 members of that board were myself, Cal Riggins, and Mary Gable. The headline of my post was simple: I no longer own your neighborhood. You do. The effect was instantaneous. It was like dropping a lit match into a room full of gasoline. The story exploded. Local news crews, who I'd tipped off an hour before, rolled into the subdivision. They caught Lynette on her front lawn as she was screaming into her phone. A reporter asked her about the demolition, about the lawsuit, about the land trust. She completely lost it. "He hunted on my land," she shrieked, her face contorted with rage, the camera capturing every insane, incriminating word. It was the sound of a queen realizing her castle was made of sand. The residents, now empowered and furious, turned on her. That afternoon, the sheriff's department, facing a federal lawsuit and a media firestorm, finally acted. They arrived at Lynette's house. This time, they weren't there to protect her. They were there to serve her with a warrant for her arrest on charges of trespassing and felony destruction of property. The key evidence? The crystal-clear footage from my high-definition security drone that had been silently recording the entire demolition from 1,000 feet up. She had forgotten all about my little toy. The fallout was swift and absolute. Lynette Hardgrove's perfectly curated world collapsed around her. Facing criminal charges and a federal lawsuit, her carefully constructed network of allies evaporated. Judge Elbert Crane, seeing the writing on the wall, abruptly announced his retirement for health reasons, quietly disappearing from public life before the Judicial Review Board could formally investigate him. Mark Brenner, the wannabe cop, was fired by the newly formed Community Trust and faced his own charges for trespassing and property damage from that night in my shed. The developer, seeing their corrupt partnership exposed, pulled out of the luxury cabin deal so fast they probably left skid marks on the county pavement. But the real justice came in the courtroom. The civil case was a slam dunk. The evidence was overwhelming. The illegal charter amendments, the financial ties, the backdated demolition order, and the pristine drone footage of the demolition itself. The judge, a no-nonsense woman from out of state brought in to avoid any conflict of interest, ruled that the demolition was not only illegal, but malicious. Lynette and her co-conspirators on the board were found personally liable. She was ordered to pay $1.4 million in restitution, a sum that covered the full replacement value of my home, all my legal fees, and punitive damages. Her assets were frozen. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. She lost everything: the power, the prestige, the perfect house with the perfectly manicured lawn. She had tried to burn down my kingdom and ended up reigning over a pile of ash. But the most incredible thing happened outside the courtroom. The day after the verdict, I stood on the broken slab of my foundation, trying to figure out where to even begin. I heard the rumble of a truck coming up the driveway. It was Cal, his old Peterbilt shining in the morning Sunday. He had a couple of generators and a tool chest in the back. "Figured you could use a hand," he grunted, hopping out of the cab. Behind him came another truck, and another. Soon the long driveway was lined with vehicles. Neighbors from the subdivision, people I'd never even met, were walking up to the site, carrying hammers, saws, and coolers of water. Veterans from my old unit, guys I hadn't seen in years, had driven in from 3 states away. They'd seen the story on the news and came to help one of their own. It turned out the new community trust, now run by Cal, Mary, and a board of elected residents, had taken its first official vote. It wasn't about rewriting rules or setting new fines. It was a unanimous vote to use the trust's initial operating funds and a whole lot of volunteer labor to rebuild my home. The work was hard, but the feeling was something I hadn't experienced in a long, long time. It was the feeling of a community, not one bound by arbitrary rules and the threat of fines, but by a shared sense of purpose. People who had been afraid to speak up a few months ago were now working side by side, laughing and sharing stories. They rewrote the community rules themselves. No more petty fines. No more forced inspections. No HOA would ever be reinstated without a 100% vote from every single resident. They took back their neighborhood. Over the next few months, a new house rose from the ashes of the old one. It was stronger, built on a foundation not just of concrete and steel, but of solidarity and respect. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was a testament to what can happen when good people decide they've had enough. That fall, my grandson Mark came back up for a visit. The air was crisp, and the aspens were a brilliant gold. The house was finished, filled with the smell of fresh-cut pine and the warmth of a fire in the new stone hearth. The morning he arrived, I handed him the rifle his great-grandfather had given me. It was his turn now. He walked out into the same woods, on the same land, for his first solo hunt. I watched him go from the porch of the new house, a cup of coffee warming my hands. He was walking with a confidence I hadn't seen in him before. The shadow of that terrible day finally lifted. A gentle peace settled over the mountain, a quiet that felt earned, fought for, and cherished. The mountains don't belong to paperwork. They belong to people willing to stand their ground.